We're just going to take a few minutes to think about some larger framing and structures and expectation setting for virtual learning. And one of the first guiding questions that we recommend you reflecting on with your team and individually is, what is it that we are hiring virtual learning to do? So take a minute and think about that. You don't have to put anything in the chat, but think about that question. What is it that you're hiring virtual learning to do? What's its role? What is its purpose? A lot of teams have had, all of us have had to dive right in, right, and jump right into putting something in place so that our students aren't falling behind, right? Or they have some structure to help them keep practice or continue their learning or go deeper. But because many systems have had to be so reactive, there hasn't always been the time to kind of think about what is the role that we want virtual learning to play. So you might be feeling like, if moving forward, we might be feeling like a range of different feelings and a range of different reasons why virtual learning is happening and how you're using it. So on the next slide, you'll see just a couple of like sample reactions and some sample responses that maybe you might be thinking or that capture how might you be feeling. So some of you might be thinking, you know what, I actually am not sure. We just started putting stuff into an LMS. We knew we had to do something. So we figured putting some math and ELA and science content into our LMS is better than doing nothing. And it's a stopgap for now. And it's our first step. Some of you might be like, you know what, we're actually pretty well positioned for virtual learning. We have a strong adoption with our LMS. We're using it as a way to go deeper with helping kids to work on projects in middle and high school and learn how to collaborate remotely, right? So you might feel like you're more there. Some of you might be feeling like, we want to make sure that we're kind of continuing what we're doing in the classroom. We're helping students make progress, right, and demonstrate mastery as they advance through the curriculum. But maybe now it's a time to say, and we can do that more and help students do that at their own pace. The point here and the takeaway, though, is to have that conversation with your team and to reflect on what it is you're hiring virtual learning to do. Again, because we've had to be so reactive. If you can, take a step back and think about that question. And then as teams, generally have stepped up to help their children and the families in their communities transition to distance learning, the focus is on academics, right, and achievements and making sure learning is happening. And kind of some of the quotes that we talked about and surfaced in the last slide found districts and schools putting in some sort of maintenance structure, right? Some way to make sure that kids are getting exposure, that they're working on grade level content and standards aligned content, but maybe not using this as a way for students to really demonstrate mastery or to engage in like deeper interdisciplinary project-based learning or more complex cognitive tasks. That might not be where you are yet. We also don't know, because of these conditions, like how long virtual learning is going to be happening. What the takeaway here, though, is simply viewing virtual learning as a progression and being clear with your team on where you all are right now. Are you really using virtual learning as an opportunity to go deeper and facilitate deeper learning? Or is it because it's so unknown? You know what, right now we're just trying to maintain and make sure students don't lose some of the progress that they've made and the skills and new knowledge that they've gained over the past year. While it's super critical to focus on the depth of learning, in a virtual setting, we can't be focusing on that alone, right? We also have to consider, to what level are we personalizing learning as well in the virtual space? And I mean that from both the academic picture and perspective and also students' social emotional needs. We have to make sure we're taking both of those into account. And then the other thing to enable deeper learning in a virtual space are the virtual operations. So things like schedule and attendance and how do students get help with technical issues. And so all these different variables play in so that deeper learning can happen or maintaining learning can happen wherever you are in your journey. Another way to think about those ideas is, and the idea of a progression is through this visual here, right? Our aim is still like it would be in a brick and mortar setting. We want students to achieve, and we care deeply about students' well-being, and we want to facilitate experiences and opportunities to do that, right? But the conditions that we're playing and operating in are obviously very different. Students aren't right in front of us. People are working on devices. We can't be synchronous all the time like we would and like in a bell schedule environment, right? So there's like a lot of different variables at play here. This anchor, if you just go back for one sec, Jason, this chart, right, and this visual, it might help kind of facilitate a conversation with your team and help you kind of think about, okay, I think, we're really just starting out with some of our virtual operations. We haven't really thought about schedule yet, but we've considered attendance. Most of our stuff is whole group. All kids are getting the same thing, but we know what our next step is. So this might just help you frame that conversation with your team and kind of where you are and how you might want to move forward. If you want to go a little bit deeper and think about, what we mean by some of these dimensions, this is what we're talking about here, right? On the PL side, it's a personalized learning. It's really the student choice and ownership, which I would include social emotional needs in there. Thinking about the depth of learning, moving down, right? How are you designing learning experiences to meet different needs or to facilitate the type of educational experience that you value in the virtual environment? And then finally, like, what are the virtual operations that you're designing and putting in place or repurposing for these new conditions? So moving away from purpose, the main action here is to sit down and think about that and define that with your team and be explicit and have a conversation with your team and reflect on your own. What is it that we're hiring virtual learning to do? And just use that as a way to facilitate and gain alignment, and know that that might be a moving target. You're starting now, maybe it's just a 1-week sprint where you're focused on, we really just need to get some maintenance structures in place and make sure all students have access. And then we're going to move on to thinking about how we help students master and move at different paces. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here. Once your team is aligned on purpose and what your purpose might be for maybe the next couple of weeks, or could be longer depending on how state announcements and districts decide in the coming weeks, you have to think about roles. So what is everybody's role in facilitating the type of virtual learning that you value? And when you think about your role, I'd like you to just do a quick thought exercise right now. What are some of the things that you do in normal times? And by normal, I mean when you're just going to the central office every day, right? Or visiting schools. If you work in the central office or you're in a school setting, you're a teacher or a building leader or an assistant principal or a coach, think about what are the things that you do to enable student learning, just in your day-to-day. What are some of your normal responsibilities? Just think about that for a second. So think about your role. What are 5 things you do during normal times? So once you have those in your head, right, we're going to look at a teacher example real quick. So if you think about it, if we move to the teacher example, you'll see that your role and your responsibility is essentially the same. The conditions that you're operating in, very different, right? So the tools you're using and the way you meet those responsibilities are different. But if you're a teacher, you're still have a responsibility to design lessons, right? You still need to take and report attendance. You still are going to want to support and coach individual students. What we've been observing and seeing with a lot of the districts and schools we work with is because there's this sudden shift to virtual, a lot of teams are feeling a bit confused and unclear on like, well, what is my role now? And like, what am I supposed to be doing, right? And we're just trying to remind people, and this may seem obvious, but reminding everybody and people who might feel confused that, hey, your role and ultimately what you're accountable for is still the same, but that's just going to look different. And maybe we're going to prioritize these 3 things because we believe that they will most enable the type of virtual learning we value and the purpose we value the most, right? So a way to have that conversation with your team is potentially, you could use this visual right here. These are just some guiding questions to help teams think about and individuals think about the role that they play in the virtual learning setting. Again, based on the purpose and what you're hiring virtual learning to do. So this is, well, again, like Courtney said, we will make the slides available. So you could use this as reflection questions to help you and your team think about and define each different stakeholder's role. Which leads us to the last, the last action here that we would recommend is really just to take time to sit down and clarify roles and expectations. What are you hoping coaches are doing? What are you expecting from families, or what kind of guidance can you give to them? What role are students playing, and how does that look different at different developmental levels or grade levels?